Do you know the secret ingredient of a good tomato sauce? The secret is simply time, not the herb. The problem with time, however, is, well, it takes time. But could there be a way to add time to your food in no time? I've got an idea. First of all, why time? When cooking tomatoes for a long time, the natural sugars develop, adding both depth and complexity to the dish. But how long does this process take? And how would one go about testing it? At first I thought, why not add a bunch of tomatoes to a pot and cook them for a long time, removing some every hour. But I simply couldn't come up with a guaranteed way to execute this without inconsistencies. There would be quite a few obstacles. How would I secure a completely stable temperature? How would I make sure none of the tomatoes got some random caramelization on the bottom of the pot? How would I ensure the same level of hydration throughout the experiment? The water would surely evaporate throughout the cooking, forcing me to add water now and then, thus making it difficult to determine whether cooking caused an eventual increase in flavor or if it was simply more concentrated at the particular moment I removed a batch due to evaporation. After thinking about this for a while, I realized that the only way I could create a consistent cooking environment was to sous vide individual bags of tomatoes. Yet, there was still one downside to this way. Another important part of developing the flavor of tomatoes is cooking off the acid. This would be impossible having them in sealed bags. Creating an opening in the bags wasn't an option either, as that would bring back the problem of evaporation. After a while, I decided to move on with this setup, as I had an idea of how to get around the acid problem, which you'll see later in the video. I added your ordinary canned tomatoes to 9 different sous vide bags in order to find out how the flavor would develop when cooked from 1 hour up to 9 hours. I cooked them in a water bath at 185 degrees Fahrenheit or 85 degrees Celsius, removing 1 bag every hour. After 9 hours, I taste tested the tomatoes to try and figure out how many hours it takes before there's a significant increase in flavor. Looking at the colors of the bags, I first noticed a change in color around the 6-hour mark, which made me expect a change in flavor at that point. This was indeed true, as even though there was a slight increase in the roundness of the tomatoes up until the 6-hour mark, this was the first bag where I tasted a noticeable sweetness in the back of the mouth. However, this change was much more apparent at the 7-hour mark. In the next 2 bags, 8 and 9 hours, the roundness and fullness of the flavor increased, and the texture definitely became more liquidy, which I took as a sign of some sort of breakdown in the structure of the tomatoes, leaving me to the conclusion that 9 hours is better than all the bags before. Although, the taste testing was still affected by the presence of the acidity in the tomatoes. I felt like there was a clear conclusion that the cooking had definitely added value to the tomatoes. There was a much more harsh and metallic character to the flavor of the first bags compared to the last ones. But I would still need to get rid of the acid, otherwise it would put an end to the whole idea behind this experiment. But it turned out the acid wouldn't be much of a problem at all. Cooking off the acid can be achieved rather quickly, actually in a matter of minutes. I decided that I needed to taste test the flavor development without the acid to figure out whether this time-traveling trick is worth the effort. Since I already concluded that the 9-hour bag was superior, I went ahead and tested the 9-hour bag against a freshly opened can of tomatoes. I cooked a very simple tomato sauce first with a freshly opened can of tomatoes and then one with the contents of bag number 9. To the best of my ability, I tried to keep consistency, so they were cooked more or less the same. Adding olive oil when the pan was at an identical temperature, then 2 tablespoons of finely diced shallots, sauteing them for around 30 seconds, and lastly adding the tomatoes and reducing them for exactly 5 minutes. This way, I pretty much ensured the same level of concentration due to evaporation as well as allowing the acid to cook off. Now, to taste testing the 2 tomato sauces. First I tasted the sauce made from the freshly opened can, and it was alright as you would expect from a simple tomato sauce, however maybe a bit rough. Then the 9-hour tomato sauce. The first thing I noticed was a very full and mouth-filling experience compared to the first one. It was hard to describe exactly what was different, except it definitely was. It was like some kind of essence had manifested in the tomatoes, being nowhere particular and everywhere at the same time. And I even noticed it while cooking. Cooking both sauces, I left the room to get stuff for the taste test. During the fresh canned sauce, I didn't even think about it. However, returning to the room while cooking the 9-hour sauce, I was hit with a very welcoming feeling. The familiar feeling of walking into a home where someone has been cooking for hours. That's when I knew I was onto something. So, is it worth it? I could definitely see some use for this. This way, you can cook a bunch of tomatoes and freeze them. Then at another time, you will be able to add the essence of slow cooking at an instant. Or said in another way, put your time into a bag when you have the time at hand. Then later on, when the time is not an option, you simply add back the time from the bag. I guess you could also cook the tomatoes in a pot and save them for later, but this is much more convenient. No stirring or adding water when they get too reduced. Just bagging them and leaving them for 9 hours, or maybe even longer. I'll have to get back to that at some point. Which brings me to, are you tired of not knowing which kitchen knife to buy? Go check out my complete guide to kitchen knives and find out which knife I recommend 90% of people to buy by clicking this link. Thank you very much for watching. If you found this video helpful or interesting in any way, don't forget to like and subscribe. Take care.